Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the recap and review of NCIS Season 13, Episode 24, Family First. So we start out with Tony still staring at the footage of the farmhouse burning down, because that was happening. The necklace is in his hand, and he seems to be focused on only one thing, which is Ziva. The whole team is there, and then the news reports that one survivor has been found. Tony says what everyone already knows, which is if that's Ziva, he has to be there. Gibbs tells McGee to book Tony a plane, and McGee's like, already did. Because McGee's been waiting to book this man a plane to Israel for 2 years now? So then Gibbs meets Emily at the hospital. The doctor tells Emily that they're moving Fornell out of the ICU, but her parent still has a long road of recovery ahead. And Emily's like, well, better than what happened to the last one. Grace the psychiatrist shows up, and Emily asks Gibbs if that's one of his girlfriends, which can't be true because Gibbs seems to trust her. Back at NCIS, the whole team is in the squad room, and then Vance comes down and says he received a call from Tel Aviv. Great. Now let's just wait in horror and watch a scene in which Tony and his father still think Ziva is alive. And then McGee and Abby come in and communicate through tears and hugs that it looks like Ziva didn't make it. The team decides to do what they think Ziva would have done, which is find and kill Trank Court. Upstairs, Tony rushes in like the emotional mess he understandably is. He looks at Ziva's desk and there's a flashback to when they were talking about eloping. Oh no. Gibbs walks in and just really breaks it down to him like, yeah, Ziva's dead. And then Tony's like, this is no different than it always is. It's always all hands on deck. Tony is in the middle of this complete breakdown. Gibbs really kind of forces him to confront it, and he says, she was more than an agent to you. And then Tony just goes down this entire family tree of what she was to people. He says she was a daughter to you and a sister to McGee and Abby. It's stuff we already know. It's stuff we've recognized. But the fact that he's saying it out loud in this scene under these circumstances makes it so much more powerful. And then Tony says, she was no more to me than anybody. I can think of many reasons why that's not true, and I know one of them's gonna toddle into this episode in 3 minutes. Gibbs goes to the tribute to their fallen wall, and he pulls out Ziva's badge. A lot of this episode revolves around Ziva's relationship and impact on Tony, but I really like that Gibbs had a moment with her as well. A lot of this episode with Gibbs is tough love. I don't think that means he cares any less about these people involved in this situation. In fact, I think he cares a lot. Obviously, they're his family. A little later, Monroe confirms her suspicions that Court never left the US and hired someone to blow up the files in the farmhouse. And then Tony walks in a little bit more put together than the day before. So let's have him talk to Orly. That'll make things better. You might notice that it's May, and a lot of them are still wearing fall clothing. So let's just give a shout out to Tony and all of the shade he's throwing at Orly for keeping us cool during these warm summer months. Orly essentially says that Ziva's loss was unexpected and that her and Ziva had actually become friends, which I'm very curious about. But Tony's like, I don't want your sorries. And then Orly says she's there for a more personal reason. I love Vance's face when she says that because it's like, I also was not told about this. Orly tells them to bring in Tali. And for a second I was on the same wavelength as Vance. I was like, oh my god, that's her sister. Which means that on some level, I expected Ziva's dead sister to walk through that door before I expected what actually was about to happen. And then a beautiful child walks in the room, and her name is Tali, and she is Tony and Ziva's daughter. Surprise! So then Orly sits Tony down and explains to him that this child is his child that he has with Ziva. Orly confirms that Ziva assured her that Tony was the only biological possibility. In other news, Tony and Ziva slept together, apparently. She says that even though Tali looks just like Ziva, the eyes are all Tony. God help us. Throughout this scene, Tony just seems really hurt and confused as to why Ziva never told him. Obviously, that's a lot to work through, but that's interrupted by the team who was listening at the door and is very excited to meet their new niece. Down in Autopsy, Ducky tells Gibbs how this is all information overload. Tell me about it. Ducky just kind of reiterates how important it is to help Tony. In the past 24 hours, his life completely turned on its head. If this were a Friends episode, it would be called The One Where Everything in Tony's Life Happens at Once. Back at the hospital, Gibbs and Grace are talking. Grace asks him how he's feeling about this. Like, is he sad, mad, happy, scared? And Gibbs says, sure. Which is so true. At his apartment, Tony is playing with Tali. How did Tony tell Senior? Did he just call him up like, Dad, I need you to run to Babies R Us and get everything? Or did he just like walk in the door with this toddler like, you surprised? Because I was. They're playing, and then Tali asks for Caleb, which is her doggy. So he goes into the go bag and finds Ziva's scarf. He's holding the scarf up to his face, and I'm just deeply concerned that this man is inhaling a scarf that smells like burnt wood and smoke. There's a flashback of Ziva and Tony saying goodbye at the tarmac. It's the part where Ziva is telling Tony how loved he is. Unfortunately, I think that's something he reevaluates in this episode. I think he's questioning where their relationship stood, which sucks. There's also the flashback of Ziva telling him about Tali, the sister, not the child. The team figures out that they need to talk to Jacob Scott because he's the one that connected them to all this. Then we're thrown into a crash course in parenting with Professor Jimmy Palmer, and DiNozzo is the lucky student. Tony just looks like he needs a nap in this scene. Like a 6-month-long nap. Jimmy asks Tony if he's gonna come back to work because his job is so dangerous and he's a single dad now. And he gives Tony a rather unpleasant look into the crystal ball. He just explains how happiness is so important. You know, in 10 years, Tony will finally have Gibbs' job and then he'll be happy. And it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that that's not exactly what Tony wants. At the hospital, Fornell wakes up and he's like, am I dead? A question I've been asking myself this entire episode. It's a nice scene between Gibbs and Fornell. Gibbs doesn't quite catch him up on all he's missed because I think Gibbs cares enough not to send him back into a coma. On the bright side, Fornell does enjoy his watermelon pedicure. McGee and Clayton find out that Jacob Scott was introduced to Trent Court through a nuke expert, so now he's the one they need to find. But at the end of this scene, McGee gets a call from Tony and just kind of drops everything to go help him. The McGee-DiNozzo friendship is so strong in this episode. McGee goes on a walk with Tony and Tali. Then McGee asks Tony the million-dollar question. What was going on with him and Ziva? Tony tells McGee that he loved her, and McGee says, I know you did, because McGee has eyes. In NCIS team news, Monroe can read lips and Clayton is a smarty pants. Following that, there's a scene at Tony's apartment with him, Tali, and Senior. I think we're interrupting a tea party they were having, which is... Throughout this whole episode, DiNozzo keeps telling people not to call him Tali's dad. I mean, he obviously knows he's Tali's biological father, he gets that. But I think it's more of the fact that Tony doesn't think Tali really even knows who he is. I think he's thinking that at this point it would be overstepping what their connection really is to refer to him like that. But then Senior spills something, so Tony has to reach into the go bag to get wipes. And he ends up finding a framed picture of him and Ziva when they were in Paris. If the world ends, just grab this bag. I'm sure there's 20 years worth of canned goods, water, flashlight, life alert, you'll be fine. Tony's holding the picture and Tali sees it and points to Ziva and says, Ima. And then she points to Tony in the picture and says, Abba. Which means that Ziva has been telling Tali who Tony is and that she does recognize him as her dad and that they might have more of that bond than he originally thought. And then Tony pulls out Ziva's necklace, which he apparently was carrying around in his pocket, which is like a whole nother, oh god. He says that it was Ima's and now it's Tali's. And there's kind of a fade in, fade out comparison of Ziva and Tali. It's so genuinely beautiful and again, soul crushing. The more I feel things, the larger the hand motions get, so watch out. Ziva's necklace, which was such a big part of her and meant so much to her, has now been passed down to her daughter. So now even Tali and Ziva have this new layer to their relationship and this even stronger connection. And even Senior's just looking at him so proud and like, goodness gracious. Then Tony gets a call from McGee saying that if he wants to kill Trent Court, the time is now. Speak of the devil and Trent Court will probably appear. And he does, trying to light the nuke expert on fire. He tries to run, but then the team catches him and surrounds him. And then Tony steps out of the shadows. Court's like, it was nothing personal. And McGee's like, it is personal. It's Ziva. Damn straight, McGee. Tony says she was my family, and then Court reaches for his gun, and then the team has a hardcore family bonding moment and all kill Trent Court together. One for the scrapbooks, I'm sure. And then there's a scene in Gibbs's basement. Basically, Tony makes a decision about his life and his future. And Gibbs says it's something that he's known for a while, but now he has a daughter to think of. Like, Tony just can't be thinking about Tony. Tony says, evidently we have a daughter, me and Ziva. If I ever just drop one day and there's not like a defibrillator around, just start playing that line on a loop, and I'm pretty sure it'll have a similar effect. Tony says that he's done, and that he's gonna go to Israel to look for some answers and take Tali to Paris because Ziva loves Paris. At this moment, he's Tali's everything. So I think that's where he wants to devote himself to taking care of his daughter. He wants to put his family first. You know, Tony and Senior both kind of lost the love of their life. And I think Tony doesn't want to make the same mistakes that his dad did. I think he wants to learn from how he grew up. I think that strong family aspect was something he was missing for a lot of his life. And so now that he has it, I think he realizes for him that's what's going to make him happier than just following in Gibbs's footsteps and that career. In the end, he didn't even have that extreme desire to kill Trent Court. He just wanted Tali to be safe. He just wants to focus on Tali and trying to make sure Tali is happy and safe and just has a good life. If you look at season 1 Tony and then Family First Tony, he's just grown so much. Also, if someone came to season 1 Tony and was like, yeah, this is your baby, you're the only biological possibility, this would have turned into an episode of Mari. He's come a long way. Gibbs obviously respects and understands his decision. They have an exchange, and Gibbs tells Tony, you gotta do what you gotta do, and then Tony says, you gotta believe what you gotta believe. They embrace, and then Gibbs gives him a little head slap, and then, pats it away. It's very touching. I think he's really proud of Tony. At NCIS, Tony and Abby have a moment in the elevator. Abby stops the elevator, like the strong, independent woman she is, because she has to tell Tony something. She needs to tell him not that Ziva loved him, but just how much Ziva loved him. Abby just cares so deeply about both Tony and Ziva. I think that Abby realizes that this is something that Ziva would have really wanted her to do. He doesn't really quite know where their relationship stood, but I think with stuff like this and with the necklace scene, I think deep down he knows that she really loved him. I really hope he realizes that more and more as time passes. When Abby's trying to explain to Tony how much Ziva loved him, she says, I know, she told me. What? A lot of parts of this episode spring off of things we've never seen, which is interesting. So then Abby and Tony hug, and she tells him how much she's gonna miss him, and he tells her how much he's gonna miss her. Then there's a montage of Tony handing in his badge. Tony gives his badge to Vance, and Vance gives him a nod. At last, the Mother of My Child is Dead Club can have a new member. It is an appreciative look. He says goodbye to Jimmy and Ducky, and then he goes down and clears out his desk, and there's a picture of him and Kate in old magazines. He calls McGee Very Special Agent Timothy McGee, officially passing down the crown. His goodbye to Bishop is also really on point. Most of these goodbyes are short, sweet, and to the point. It's still fitting and touching. Then Tony gets into the elevator, and the door to his NCIS career officially closes. Just like that, the new team's talking in the squad room, and then Gibbs smiles upon them and tells them to grab their gear. And that is Family First. Where do I begin? Let's start with the thing I expected the least. Because I knew it was certainly a possibility that Ziva would die. And I expected Tony to resign. But I completely and absolutely did not expect Tali. It completely blew my mind. As I'm sure you can imagine, I took the news well. And it's so funny because we have been getting hints. Whether it was the thing with the senior a couple episodes back where he said, if you ever become a father one day, and I hope you will, or the fat fish comment. Can you believe the fat fish was a foreshadowing technique? Because I can't. That episode where Tony told Abby that Ziva Fish put on some weight, and then there were little murmurs of maybe she's pregnant, and I was like, there's no way. There was a way. For a solid 48 hours after this episode, I didn't believe it existed. I just couldn't believe it, and I still can't believe it. I know it exists now. It's so... Tony and Ziva have a daughter. Every time I say that, I feel reborn. And then I remember Ziva and I die again. The circle of life. Let's talk about the fact that Ziva didn't tell Tony. Maybe this is one of those scenarios where she didn't know she was pregnant. That's why Ziva didn't tell Tony, because Ziva didn't even tell Ziva. When Tony left Ziva in Israel, she was in such a not great place. I think she went there with the intention of rebuilding her life and kind of starting anew and focusing on making her life better. And then all of a sudden she had a child to raise and care for completely. I can't even imagine the impact that would have had on her. She had to say goodbye to Tony, which I'm sure was very difficult. And then Tony and Tali have the same eyes, so she's looking into Tony's eyes every day. I mean, I hope she had some kind of support system in Israel, because I feel like she's working through a lot of things. I'm wondering if that's why her and Orly might have become friends. Like, who else? Yeah, I'm sure Dina's gonna swoop right in and help. Maybe Shmuel? I feel like Shmuel usually knows what's up. That's who Tony needs to talk to when he goes to Israel, Shmuel. Orly says something to Tony, and it's along the lines of, she knew you wouldn't be pleased. I'm wondering if Tony took that as, she knew you wouldn't be pleased that you two had a child together. But I think if Ziva did say that, she would have more so meant Tony wouldn't be pleased that she kept this from him for so long. I don't think Ziva would ever doubt that Tony would have rushed back there. I think she wanted to give Tony the opportunity to live his own life, and I think she was still under the mindset that she was the cause of all the terrible things that were happening. I don't think Ziva would ever intentionally hurt Tony or Tali. Maybe it was a not so great choice not to tell Tony. I think she did it because she thought that was what was best. And I think the fact that she was teaching Tali who Tony was means that she had the intention of telling him eventually. And by eventually, I don't mean Ziva be like, hey Tony, our daughter's graduating high school. And Tony'd be like, what daughter? I think even Gary Glassberg put out something that said Ziva was going to tell him eventually. But she kind of had to wait for the right time, since that initial right time had kind of passed. But having kids was on her I will list. And even beyond that, in later episodes, she talked about wanting to have a family. So I really hope she did have happiness when she was in Israel. I really hope her and Tali did go on some nice adventures together. I think she still had that intention of making sure Tony was incorporated into his daughter's life. And I think Tony's already kind of doing the same thing, with the necklace and taking her to Paris. I think Tony's making sure Ziva stays incorporated into Tali's life. Let's talk about Ziva again. I don't think at this point Tony is 100% convinced that Ziva's dead. I think he knows it's very, very certainly a possibility. He has that whole line about Ziva loves Paris and you gotta believe what you gotta believe, and he has to look for some answers. He'll accept whatever the truth is eventually, but I think right now he just needs some time. You gotta believe what you gotta believe. If you believe Ziva's dead, there's obviously a really, really strong chance you're right. But if you want to believe that Ziva's still out there, we never found a body. I'd love to see Ziva alive. I liked that scene of Gibbs kind of reflecting a little bit on some Ziva memories. Ziva meant so much to so many people. She was an amazing friend and sister and mother. But it's also so important to remember her as that incredible, fierce, fearless agent. And this incredible woman who was so strong and fiery and clever and funny and loving and dedicated. Ziva's relation to other characters is incredible, but also Ziva herself as her own person, as her own character. I think it's always so important to acknowledge that. Going into this episode, I was hoping we would leave Tony in a place that would put him on track for a great future and to have the potential for a wonderful life. I think even though there are a lot of bumps along the way, I think he still has that potential. He's at this very new chapter in his life, and I think there's going to be some things he certainly has to adjust to. I think that's part of why he's going to Israel, to look for some more personal answers. He does have this new, exciting, happy aspect to his life. I think it's going to be quite a little journey, but I think they still can have this really great life ahead of them. And I think with Tony, that's going to make him happy. I think he has an incredible support system back home, and I think, Tali's obviously gonna grow up super duper loved. I really hope he'll realize more as time passes just how much Ziva loved him. I think there's going to be some things he'll understand eventually, and I think there's going to be things he'll never quite understand. I think he's going to grow, and I really hope him and Tali have some wonderful adventures ahead. So Tony's going to Israel, which I think is great. Is he selling the apartment? Like, is this a permanent move? What's happening to the fish? I need to know. Please do not tell Tali that her mother is in the fishbowl. Tony and Ziva's relationship was and still is amazing. I think they grew so much from one another. And I'm sure as Tali grows up, there's going to be aspects of who she is that Tony's going to be like, wow, that's so Ziva. And there's going to be parts of her that are really Tony. And there's going to be parts of Tali that are just Tali. And it's, oh, Tali. Still can't believe it. Obviously, I think Tony really, really loves Ziva. Well, we know Tony loved Ziva because he said it. But I think he really, really loved her, just like she really, really loved him. The title, Family First. This episode is overflowing with family. There's family that's related through blood, and then there's the family that's created through life experiences. I love that they went across that whole spectrum. There's McGee and Tony stuff, and Gibbs and Ziva stuff. Even Bishop, who never personally knew Ziva, seems really upset and concerned because of how it's affecting her NCIS family. Tony says, she was my family. Tony and Ziva were a family before they were a 3-person family. Oh, God. They were part of that NCIS family, and I think she's always going to be a part of his family. The episode on a whole, I still don't know exactly how I feel about it. There were aspects of it that I really didn't like, but then there were also aspects that I really, really loved. This whole episode evokes so many emotions, even within the same scene. I loved seeing Tony and Tali run around the apartment, but it also felt like my heart was being ripped from my chest. It's a lot. That's my summary of season 13. It's a lot. For every single moment of this episode, there's so many things to think about. There's 1,000 different ways it can be interpreted or analyzed or thought of, or the connections that can be made. I've already been watching this episode and thinking about it in relation to older episodes. Looking at stuff like Undercovers and that episode where Tony and Ziva mash their faces together and see what their baby would look like, and now they have a baby. Even season 10 stuff, like when Tony shows Ziva pictures of him and his mom, or when she tells Tony about Tali in the opera. Thinking about this episode in relation to the characters' futures. That's really something about this episode, is just how grand it is in relation to its impact on all of the characters. On a final note, Tony DiNozzo is amazing. Just seeing how far he's come and how much he's grown. Even after 13 years, there was still a new side of him in this episode that we saw. As for Michael Weatherly, I would just like to say thank you again for 13 amazing seasons. He's going to be playing Phil McGraw on the new show Bull, which is also on CBS, which is super exciting. So I think that's all I have to say about Family First. Please tell me what you guys thought about this episode. That's it for season 13. I'm really interested to see season 14. We surpassed 400 subscribers, which is wonderful. You guys are amazing. Side note, one final thing. TV Line, they always put out that May sweep scorecard. Every year, NCIS shows up on that list in a way that completely shocks and surprises me. This year, it was the fact that under characters giving birth, it said Ziva David gives birth off-screen to Tali. Was not expecting that. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you're having a great day. And that's a wrap on season 13.